Well, good evening. We're doing a special 12-week summer series on apologetics. If you don't know me, my name is Dave Newton, and I've been here at Calvary since 1990, so long time. We're going to do 12 weeks, taking a look at some great topics. My goal is to give you things that you can use right away, practical. So, when you think about apologetics, one of the places I go to is Acts chapter 17, when Saul is up on the Areopagus, or the Areopagus, which is Mars Hill, just below the Acropolis there in Greece. And he had a lot of dialogue with some skeptics by the name of the Stoics and Epicureans. I've been up there a few times and over the years, and always love to read out, which is printed right there on a placard in stone, right as you go up the steps from Acts chapter 17. It's Paul's sermon about the unknown God. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this concept called apologetics. Now, apologetics, what is that? In the Greek, it's a term apologia. It means a verbal defense, a legal, reasoned argument. And it's used there in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 for the reasoned argument for the word, the logos, regarding the expectation that's within you. We're encouraged to always be ready to give an apologia to anybody who would ask. Places like Biola University have a course on apologetics focused on the serious intellectual challenges to the gospel and the Christian worldview. Liberty University has a course in that and talks about engaging questions, doubt, and skepticism about Christianity. Lavelle College has a wonderful program, but it's focused primarily on defending Christian faith in contemporary culture. And so this 12-week dialogue is going to be, essentially, we're going to take a look each week at the questions that a skeptic would ask, and we're going to reply with well-prepared, thoughtful, rational, logical, reasonable answers, things that will equip you to have that conversation. So the takeaways I want to give you each week are something that's easy to remember and something that's easy to explain. Now, when you see my slides, you might feel like it doesn't look really easy. Doesn't look really simple, but trust me, it will be very easy. A couple caveats. The first one, we have three. Literally everything that I present the next 12 weeks faces significant challenges, concerns, and even outright ridicule. And a lot of folks just simply say, come on, Dave, really? Because no matter what position you have, there's going to be those who are just going to be against it. First, that's going to come from, we expect it, outside Christian circles and Christian thinkers. But sad to say, it's also going to come from within Christian circles and Christian thinkers. I can guarantee you, everything I present, we could have 5 on each side of me who are Christian philosophers, theologians, and so forth, and pastors who would absolutely disagree with my position. And they're believers, I think. So, number 2, rarely, if ever, does a great apologetics response convince the skeptic to change the position. So this is not to give you something so you can get into a great argument and win the argument. The goal here is to give you something that's reasonable, logical, rational, thoughtful, so that you can get rid of the stereotypical way that people often think about believers, that we're unreasonable, we're illogical, we don't have brains, we're irrational, and we're very closed-minded. When you give a great, well-thought-out, rational response, the other side is going to have to say, wow, that actually makes sense. I have to be careful here. And number 3, we're not going to use the Bible in our defense of the Christian faith. Why? Because the first thing the skeptic would say is what? I don't believe in the Bible. So if you're standing there with a great position all from the Scriptures, they're going to look and say, what else you got? And you're going to say, nothing else. But think about it. How do Mormons support Mormonism? With the Book of Mormon. How do the Jehovah's Witnesses support with the Watchtower and their own translation of the Scriptures? So how does Islam, propagate the whole notion of Allah? Well, through the Quran. So we're not going to base our apologetics on the Scriptures. Now, we will bring in lots of Scripture as we go through the 12 weeks at the right places to give you some sense as to how Paul and others understand this. So session 1, our first night, science, philosophy, and theology are going to converge. The first topic we cover is, what is your worldview? Why is your worldview so important to apologetics? And this will always segue as soon as you get through your concept of worldview, because there really only are 2 worldviews. The skeptic is going to then ask, so is there a God? Any proof that God exists? And so as you go through that, the worldview, think of it this way, it's your lens through which you have your perspective. That's how you view things. And there's really only two worldviews out there. The first one is a naturalist worldview. Planet Earth all around us, the moon, the sun, the stars, the galaxies above us, all are results from completely natural, random statistical processes, accidental iterations without any purpose, design, or intention. Life is entirely meaningless. It's an outcome of accidental iterations over billions of years. Isn't that encouraging? Okay. People are born, then they live with a physiological consciousness based solely on chemical reactions in their brain matter, and eventually the physical body deteriorates to a point where it ceases to function, and that's it. Exciting, right? Doesn't that give you reason to live and get up each day, right? Okay. Kind of reminds me of the band The Godfathers from 1987. They had a great song, Birth, School, Work, Death. That's a nice British 1980s outlook on life, wouldn't you say? Then the question comes down to, some people say, well, a good worldview then is to have a theistic worldview, have a God worldview. But be careful there for a moment. Because yes, there is a God, but Islam, Baha'i, Zoroastrianism also are monotheistic in how they view things. The New Age is polytheistic, along with Hinduism. They believe there's many, many gods. Buddhism, Taoism, existentialism, typical humanism, classic Marxism are all atheistic. And then, of course, there's agnosticism, which says, you can't actually know anything. Okay? My students in university for 28 years used to pull that one on me all the time. When it came to the exam, they would say, I'm agnostic, Dr. Newton, I don't remember anything that we have to do on this test. So the key is not just theism, it's about a biblical Christian worldview. So those are the two positions, a naturalist worldview and a Christian, biblical, Christ-centered worldview. So as our lens of perspective, now the supernaturalist, which is the camp I'm in, says that planet Earth all around us, the moon, the stars, the galaxies above us, all are results from supernatural, powerful designer, creator. The world demonstrates higher order power and intelligence, intention and purpose. Humans are unique from all life on Earth. We have personal characteristics in us from the designer creator. Inherent morality, abstract thinking, emotions, rationale, and logic. So let's start with basic probability, okay? We're going to give you all a copy of this book tonight, but I thought no one would stay for next week. I did this book with Stephen Cole, professor at Marquette University in Wisconsin, and it's on applied multiple regression. I know a lot about statistics. Let's start a few things. How about a coin flip? Everybody knows how to flip a coin, right? There's a 50% chance you're going to get what? A head or a tail, okay? Now, if you flip it and you say, what's the likelihood? What's the likelihood, Mitch, that I could get two heads in a row? Well, it's a 50% chance on each one, raised to the second power, gives you 0.25. That's a 25% likelihood. So you have a 1 in 4 chance of flipping a head 2 times in a row. How about 10 in a row? Somebody says to you, hey, Bart, what do you think? Could you do 10 in a row, get heads 10 in a row? Well, that's 0.5 to the 10th power. That's a 1 in 1,000 chance. 1 in 1,000 chance of doing that, okay? How about 100 in a row? 100 in a row is 0.5 raised to the 100th power. That means you have a 1 in a number 1 with 31 zeros after it. That's your chance. And the reason I'm giving you a little bit of probability is because you're going to see some numbers tonight from the naturalistic worldview that absolutely do not make any sense from pure statistics. There's absolutely no way from random processes any of these things could happen. Let me give you a classic quote. Most textbooks today, at least when I was in junior high back in the early 70s, the universe was 4.3 billion years old. So in the last 45 years, the world has gotten actually 3 times as old. They keep needing to add time to make things work. It's now up to 13.8 billion years for our universe. That is 10 to the 17th power seconds. So we throw around these numbers almost like our national debt, $33 trillion. Yeah, 33 trillion. What's 33 trillion? Okay. 10 to the 17 seconds is 13.8 billion years. Think how big that number is, 10 to the 17th power. Contemplate that for a moment. 13.8 billion years can be written as 10 to the 17th seconds. Give you an idea what 10 to the 17th looks like. Cover the 268,000 square miles of Texas with little silver dollars 2 feet deep over the entire state. That's 10 to the 17th silver dollars. 286,000 square miles covered in little silver dollars, 2 feet deep. That's 10 to the 17th. The French statistician Émile Borel in 1943, and they still quote it in almost all the books today, said that impossibility is when you get to 10 to the 50th. I don't know about you, you should be laughing right now, because 10 to the 17th is ridiculous. But they're saying if you're at 10 to the 17th, there's still a chance. There's still a chance. It's when you get to 10 to the 50th, that's when you start to say it's probably impossible. Think about that. Do you know in the entire universe, not our solar system, not our galaxy, in the entire universe, the total number of subatomic particles, that's all the protons, neutrons, and electrons in all matter, is 10 to the 80th. Contemplate that for a moment. In the entire universe, there are 10 to the 80th particles in the whole universe. And they're saying when you get to 10 to the 50th, that's when we draw the line on whether something's going to be logical or not, okay? Does that help? Okay? Get ready for some notes. So always think 10 to the 50th is how science defines something as, yeah, it's probably impossible, okay? But at 10 to the 49th, could happen. What's your chances of playing in the NBA if you're a college basketball player? If you're playing in college basketball, you have about a 1 in 1,600 chance that you'll play, okay? Not intramurals, okay, with your dorm. I'm talking about you're on a basketball team for any NCAA Division 1, 2, or 3, and so forth. What's the likelihood you'll play in the NBA? You have a 1 in 1,600 chance. What's the likelihood of being struck by lightning in the United States this year? 1 in 1.26 million. It's about 270 people a year get struck by lightning in the United States, so you have about 1 in 1.26 million chance of that. How about winning the Powerball? 1 in 292 million. Okay? Some of you are sitting there going, I just bought like 8 tickets too, right? How about that your DNA isn't really yours, it might actually potentially be somebody else's from a DNA 17 test. That's a 1 in 1.2 billion chance that you'd have some kind of overlap. Not the exact same, but some kind of overlap with somebody else's. So the skeptic will ask then, so why do you have that worldview? Why do you have that? And the believer should reply with something rational. So tonight I'm going to give you 4 interesting ways to respond. Now I hope you understand, I could teach apologetics from all kinds of perspectives. In fact, we're going to cover a lot of topics in the ensuing 11 weeks. But tonight, as this kickoff, I'm going to talk to you about the MacBook, the weed, the cell, and the human being. MCDH. Think of it like kind of a rap group or something like that, okay? Always remember MCDH, okay? So let's do the MacBook first. I'm on a MacBook right here in front of you, okay? Pretty amazing. I wish I would have had one of these back in 1977 when I was in college. That would have been great. Here's the guts of the MacBook kind of pulled apart and laid out. Here's the central core processors and so forth kind of laid out. It has a controller, aluminum alloy case, circuit boards, an OLED retinal display, hard drive, USB and Thunderbolt ports and so forth, cooling fan, video card, keyboard, wiring, speakers and so forth. And even more so, it has a logic board that is running a program called Mac OS. That's the operating system that runs this thing. And inside it has random access memory, it has these solid state disks and so forth for the storage in the central processing unit, the CPU, and it's running this 28-core Intel Xeon W chip. That's the processor that runs this thing, okay? Do you know it takes a technician 2 to 3 days to assemble a MacBook from scratch? And it uses 63 screens of instruction to do that. Okay, everybody with me? The big thing that's going on in this MacBook is information. Information makes the whole thing function. It makes the whole thing work. What makes it work is there are 55 million lines of code in the MacBook's processor. Some of you say, 55 million lines of code. What does that look like? Well, figure about 2 lines every inch. That's 426,000 miles of printout if you printed out the code on paper. It'd be 426,000 miles long, 18 times around the Earth. 18 times, that's the code that's running my MacBook. The Intel Xeon W processor, this little processor that's inside, that's what it looks like magnified. It can do 3.8 billion instructions per second. That's not a typo. 3.8 billion instructions or calculations or whatever per second. That's 3.8 gigahertz. And you know what? The entire thing is running on information. All on information. So what's the probability that my MacBook showed up in the world accidentally? Well, first, you'd have to ask, where did all the raw materials come from? Then you'd have to ask, well, how did the raw materials turn into those specific parts? There's over 1,200 parts in this MacBook. It takes 2 to 3 days to assemble with 63 pages of instructions. Do you know there are just 56 screws for the keyboard alone? Third, how did the parts then get fit and aligned into a final form configuration so that they all work with each other? And fourth, back to that problem again, that information box. The source of the operating system coded instructions to function the whole thing. Where did that come from? The probability that in just over time, with enough time, maybe 13.8 billion years, random elements could accidentally change from their raw materials to specific parts. Those parts could then configure and align themselves and ultimately be a fully functioning MacBook. But the probability of that is greater than 10 to the 50th. Why? One of the greatest things that makes this difficult is the information. The information, you're telling me the information that runs the whole thing, the logic, the rationale, came out of nowhere? Let's do the weed. How many of you love dandelions in the middle of your lawn, right? Okay. Do you know that that is one of the most fascinating functions to spend some time reading up on the dandelion? Here's a cross-section of the leaf. It's got the cuticle, the epidermis, veins, lower epidermis. It's got all kinds of inner functions. Do you know it's the basis for modern science's nanotechnology on how to do photovoltaic receptors of sunlight because of the way the individual cells are configured inside the leaves? They then support an internal system with the pistil, the seed, the stamen, the petals, the pollen. Do you remember biology in 9th grade? Okay. Some of you are going, didn't take biology in 9th grade, Dave. Sorry. Okay. Complex processing system going on. Coordinated, independent, time-encoded cycles that keep it growing and feeding, and it works off of information. There are actual signals being sent throughout the whole structure. The dandelion is able to draw out minerals and water from the soil. It's able to then take sunlight in on these nanotechnology little cells, these micro receptors for sunlight. And it can convert it into sugars, which are food, which makes the thing continue to grow even larger and larger and larger, all on its own, but with a coded complex system. For capturing the sun's copious energy, there are 2 available engineering models in the world. One is the photovoltaic cell designed by humans that turns sunlight into flowing electrons. The other is the photosynthetic plant cell, which, by the way, was randomly occurring, was not designed. Isn't that interesting? They'll look at the photovoltaic solar panel and say, oh, obviously engineers designed that. Just look at it, the way it functions, the way it looks and everything. But this plant, this was not designed. There's no design to it, there's nothing. It just happened accidentally, and the leaves just started receiving, sunlight and so forth. In fact, Michigan State University has a 40-page paper published with the Department of Energy, and there's a quote in there on, quote, photosynthesis is a complex system of processes consisting of hundreds of subcomponent parts that work together at the cellular level. And you'll never look at a dandelion again the same way, okay? When you stand there and look at that one coming up through your sidewalk, you're going to just say to yourself, that is a fascinating, complex, incredibly processing system on the nanotechnology level, on the cellular level, and that's Michigan State University and Department of Energy quoting that for us. The key, again, is information is what drives it all. So, back to our same question, what's the probability of an accidental dandelion just coming out of nothing over billions of years? Again, where did the raw materials come from for this organic life? From inorganic material? How could raw materials suddenly turn into these specific components? You know, there's 87 components inside a dandelion. Don't you feel bad for spraying it with Roundup? Okay. How do all the parts fit and align into a final configuration that's fully functional? And fourth, where's the source for that operating instructions for those nanoreceptors and how they process the sunlight? Well, the probability that with just over time, random elements accidentally change from raw materials to the components, to the parts, that the fit and the configuration into a fully functioning nanotech photovoltaic processor is also greater than 10 to the 50th. Couldn't happen. Why? Probably the biggest component that limits that is the information. Oh, let's move on then. From the easy stuff, the MacBook and the weed, how about a simple cell? Okay, a simple cell. I put simple in front of there because that's how they used to think of the cells about 170 years ago. They used to think of it as kind of simple. Do you know there are 285 books on Amazon, textbooks, on cell biology to choose from? 280 different books. This particular one is a bestseller. It has 47 chapters, and it's 650 pages long on the what? Simple cell. Cells, here's some of the topics they cover. Cells as basis for life, molecular structures, chromatin and chromosomes in the nucleus, membrane structure and lipid biosynthesis, DNA packaging, gene-specific transcription, synthesis of messenger RNAs, and protein synthesis, carrier proteins and channel activity, and you can see where we're going with those, mitochondria and chloroplasts, endoplasmic reticulum functions. Now you're watching a finance professor get out of his league, right? Okay. Proteosomes and lysosomes, 7 helix receptors, 47 chapters, 650 pages about what? A simple cell. Doesn't sound so simple. Do you know how much information is going on inside the cell? There are about 15 or 20 really good diagrams you can find in these books about the cell and how they understand it. Look at all the components. The inside of the cell and how it functions, the membranes, the nucleus, everything that's going on inside. But it's all driven by information that knows where stuff is supposed to go and when and how it's supposed to work. Here's a great quote. This is from an evolutionist. Casey Luskin in June 6, 2013 edition of Evolution News. Anybody get Evolution News? Okay, all right. Here's the title. No, scientists in Darwin's day did not grasp the complexity of the cell, not even close. So this isn't written by a theologian or a pastor or somebody else. This is written by someone who is on the editorial board there at Evolution News. Here's an excerpt. Protoplasm that we now call cytoplasm, we know to be full of cellular organelles, molecular machines, RNA molecules, enzymes, and numerous other crucial biomolecules, was considered by Darwin's favorite authority back in his day, quote, it was the simplest form of organic life. Cells were written off as being the simplest form. Just a microscopic lump of jelly-like substance, destitute of texture, destitute of organs, no trace of organization. The cell is a nucleus with surrounding protoplasm, they called it back then. A cell wall membrane that makes the cell a closed sac. It's no longer to be regarded as necessary constituent, but only as an accessory. So that's how they quoted back in Darwin's day about the cell. This guy in his article writes this. The nucleus, which we now know to be the information control center of the cell, containing chromosomes and much of the genetic information for the DNA and so forth, representing billions of bits of information. In some cases, it's necessary to form an organism. Its exaggerated importance is how it used to be referred to in Darwin's time. It used to be referred to as having mysterious powers. There's a scientific term for you, right? Meanwhile, the membrane is called only as necessary, as an accessory. That isn't even necessary definition of a cell any longer. And yet this is the scientists of today even critiquing what was going on from Darwin's day. The key here again, you're getting ready to see this red box pop up a lot, right? The information control center. Billions of bits of information all sequenced into certain orders and functions. That's the key. What's the probability of a cell happening accidentally? Now, many of you might have had a biology course somewhere where your teacher is still pushing the same myth, which is that there was a pool of warm water 4 billion years ago, and there was a cloudy evening, and there was electricity in the clouds, and some electricity hit the pool, and all of a sudden cells burst forth. Okay, anybody have any biology background of any kind, you would know that that is not possible. So where did the organic materials come from? How random materials did they turn into these specific components inside the cell? There are 238 components and 11 subsystems all happening concurrently inside the cell. If any one of those is not working, what happens to the cell? It dies. That means you can't have an intermediate form of the cell moving up toward its final form, because anything less than full doesn't function. Third, how did these align into that final form and that whole capacity? And fourth, who provided the coding instructions for this to be a processing station? The probability that with just time, inorganic elements randomly, accidentally changing into organic components to a finely tuned configuration to a fully functioning core of all living things, which all have cells, is less than 10 to the 50th. So the first three arguments you could have, and not argument like Fox News beating each other up over some debate table. I'm talking about just having a conversation with somebody. Anybody with an open mind would have to recognize that these first three things, the MacBook, the dandelion, and a cell in life, could not happen randomly. They just could not. The probability does not work. Because again, there's this component of information, the meta component. So now we're going to spend most of our time looking at the human. When I was in 6th and 7th grade, we had to purchase this plastic guy who's about 15, 16 inches. Anybody else have a visible man or a visible woman growing up? Okay, clear plastic. The top lifts off. The bones are in there. There's little plastic stomach and liver and intestines and so forth. And you could take the top off the skull, and there was a little plastic brain that went inside and so forth. You can buy these on eBay now for about $15 in their original cases and so forth. Yeah, good old science of the 1971 or whatever, right? Okay. But let's stop for a moment and think about it. A complex calcium-based frame with 206 separate components is in the same package with a complex flexible frame connectors, over 900 ligaments and tendons holding it all together, and a complex muscular system with 600 separate muscles, with a complex respiratory system, does 12 cycles every minute, ventilating 6 liters of air, 20% oxygen, along with a complex circulatory system, does 8 to 10 ounces of an involuntary pump that just pumps all the time. We don't know why. You can talk to cardiologists today. They have things they think about it, but they don't know why the heart just keeps pumping. One of the guys here at our church just had a heart transplant a couple months ago. And it was sad that somebody had been in an accident and this young 30-year-old had lost his life, but he was an organ donor. And then our buddy, who comes to men's prayer all the time, and I've known him for years and years and years, he got the new heart, and everything's just, I mean, they literally put it in and tap it, and it starts beating again. You have 60,000 miles of veins and arteries inside you. 60,000 miles, not feet, 60,000 miles of veins and arteries. That's 2.5 times around the earth. A 4-week-old in the womb has 6 miles of veins and arteries. On top of all these complex systems, which are all fitting over this calcium-based frame, there's a complex electronervous system, 37 miles of nerve fibers. All the information gets processed through this entire thing, and each of these complex systems is one on top of the other in a single package, fully functioning. Oh, and by the way, there's a very complex central processing unit in a protective calcium container. Take your finger and do this okay? That's your calcium container, okay? Some of you might have told one of your teenagers once before, is there anything up there? Right? Okay. So is that classic line, hey, I went in and had my brain scan last week and they found nothing. You've heard that one before, right? Okay. I'm highlighting this one because the whole thing is running off this 3 pounds, 73% water, spongy kind of tissue that has inside it 100 billion neurons. And the 100 billion neurons are then connected to each other across 100 trillion synapses. You know why when they say it's not brain surgery? Okay? That's how complex the brain is. Well, let's take a look at it. The next slide. Let's focus now remember, we're already talking about a calcium-based frame that has these flexible connectors, a full muscular system, a respiratory system, a circulatory system, an electronervous system, and it's all in one package. This complex processing unit, there it is. 3 pounds, 73% water, 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion connections of synapses. There's one drawing of it mapped out. When you hold it like that, it kind of looks like what? You'd say, intuitively, there's nothing going on in there, right? Feels like a sponge or whatever. But you know what? They have mapped the brain. They have entire functions about how it works and how it functions in terms of your body. Do you know the memory in your brain can handle 2.5 petabytes of memory? So we know how you go kilobytes, millibytes, okay? You go up and so, like, have you ever done something like that? So when you go to gigabytes, then you go to terabytes, then petabytes. So this is 2.5 million gigs. 2.5 million gigabytes. Here's a flash drive from ScanDisk. It's a 1 terabyte flash drive. Anybody have a flash drive that's a terabyte? Anybody know what a flash drive is? Okay, good. All right, great, okay. We throw the word terabyte around right now like big. Do you know how much is in a terabyte? Okay? You could store 700 full-length movies and 150,000 songs, and you still have space left over. And it's on a little drive this big, $119 from ScanDisk. Your brain can hold 2,562 of those, 2.5 petabytes of memory. Some of you are saying, I don't have nearly that much memory, Dr. Dave. Okay. Not today, anyway. The key again here, that little thing up here that's encased in this special calcium protector, all it's about information. Oh, by the way, let's go back to the system. It's all been wrapped up with tendons and respiratory and circulatory and nervous system and the brain. There's also a digestive system that makes it autonomous in terms of being able to take in nutrients and keep itself alive. Do you know your intestines are 21 feet long? Okay. It's a food processor at the top. Throat, stomach, liver, pancreas, etc. Complex interaction The lungs, the heart, oxygenating fluid traveling through your body at 3 feet per second when the heart beats. It takes 1 minute to make a full cycle. You process 5 quarts of blood every minute. And it's all driven by information. Do you know that the veins and arteries have on their walls little flaps that if the blood is going this way out on a vein, on an artery away from the heart, they all flow this way, and if it tried to come back, these would pop back up almost like valve stoppers, and they wouldn't work the way. But the veins, which bring the blood back to it, theirs are facing this way, so the blood can flow this way, and it can't come back the opposite direction. Totally accidental that it worked like that. Now wait, by the way, there's also a very complex audio receptive recognition system going on. A 12-stage processor for audio. Let's take a look at it. It's a 3-stage system, and it's absolutely fascinating to go through and take a look at this. I'm not a medical doctor, okay, but to read on how the ear functions. Sound waves go in through this canal. They then hit the eardrum and start vibrations. The 3 tiny little bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, start to amplify the vibrations into the cochlea that then puts a little ripple over some fluid that's in there across this membrane that splits it in 2. There are these little hair cells that then ride the waves, and at the wide end, you get all the high-pitch ripples, and at the narrow end, you get the low-pitch ripples. Then these microscopic stereocilia are on the tops of the hair cells. They start to bend, and it causes the tops of them to open up like a straw or a tube, in which case the tips of the stereocilia open up and chemicals rush down into them, creating electromagnetic signals that go to the auditory nerve, that go to the brain for recognition. You just did all that while I was talking to you. Completely involuntarily. Information drives the entire process. Here's one of Michelangelo's famous drawings, pretty good, 1532, 1533. Forgot to tell you, the same system, we're still on the human slide, it has a complex self-maintenance and repair system. Do you know if you get a cut, platelets start rushing to the clot with white cells, removing all the dead injured cells, and new cells repair the tissue, the muscle, and the skin. If you get a broken bone, blood clots around it along with callus. It covers the fracture, and the bone cell threads start to grow toward each other and connect, and your bone is actually stronger after a break than before it was broken. If you get a virus, a direct infection of B and T lymphocytes expressing CD150 results in a transient You're getting this, right? Okay. I don't know what this means either. I don't have a medical degree or anything like that, but it activates lifelong immunity to any reinfection. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. And there's information driving all of it. Can't forget, I'm just scratching my complex visual system right now, 7 components in the larger macro picture of this reception and recognition system for visual to go along with your audio. Let's take a look at it. There's the eye, side view of it, all the different components. In the back are the rods and the cones and all the different fluids that are there to help process everything. And do you know that once it's all done processing, well, let's take a look. Controlled by the pupil, which moves on its own, open based on light, light goes through the cornea and it's bent before this aqueous humor. The lens is then bent again and creates an upside down. In fact, they use the eye as the basis for cameras. When it came time to design a camera, where'd they go to get an idea of how to do it? The human eye that just evolved. That's how we'll design cameras. Puts it upside down, goes through vitreous to the retina focal point, the macula, and then the photoreceptors are made of rods and cones, and they get charged and changed into electrical impulses that go down the optic nerve, which goes into that 3 pounds of 73% water brain to be then interpreted And the optic nerve is not as thick as a human hair. So all the information is being sent down there into your brain to then be decoded and figure things out. Oh, and by the way, this happens, close your eyes, everybody. Open them. Okay, you just processed everything in the room on the screen, me and everything like that, in a fraction of a second through that entire process. It was sent to your brain, where you have what, 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion synapses putting it all together. Information drives the entire thing. This complex human is a fully integrated component, multiple systems all working together. In your body, you have 30 to 70 trillion cells. A rigid calcium frame wrapped by nerves, blood vessels, muscles, tendons, ligaments, multiple organs, brain in a protected hard calcium case, respiration blood flow at 60 times per minute, feeding all the cells, returning all the waste. Your senses are for sight, hearing, we didn't even cover smell, taste, and touch. 48 interdependent subsystems, each supporting each other, all wrapped in 22 square feet of exterior fabric of various thicknesses. I'm not going to take my shirt off, okay? But I keep looking. My 22 square feet have had better days. Sometimes I hold some of my little grandchildren who are, under 8 years old or under 4 years old. Their skin is like perfect. And they'll even say to me, the older ones will say, "Doc, what's up with your skin?" And I go, "I know, it's like 60-something years old. It's been around a while, right?" Air, food, water, waste, daily processed in the station in your 30 to 70 trillion cells. And we all saw how complex those cells were. Do you know that this human body is the basis for every form of the most advanced robotics? When engineers are going to build a robot, what do they use as their model? The human. The obvious design specs by a team of engineers. When you see a robot and you look at it, you think, what? Wow, who built that? Right? How did they design that? Multiple systems, gears, frames, movement, sight, sound, etc. But everything in that robot requires what? A program of information to have it do things. It doesn't just do things, it has to be programmed. Does it program itself? No. Does the programming fall out of the sky? No. A team programs it. Okay? Requires information programming. That's the key. The human body is the basis for how engineers design and program modern robots. I've been reading on robots for a long time and seeing some at the Consumer Electronics Show and so forth, and some of the newer ones are incredible. Here's a MIT professor having a conversation with, he doesn't have any friends, by the way, he just is robots, okay, so, but think about this for a moment. Higher order humans are the ones who program the information so the robot will function. If you saw a robot, first you would recognize it obviously displays design, just in how it's been put together and all the systems and all the people the engineering team had to design everything. And then for it to function and do things, you'd have to say, well, somebody had to write the software to have the thing work, right? A human-designed built robot cannot do anything except what it's been programmed to do. Okay? Here's a couple different views of some of these. They're downright scary when they start putting the latex faces over some of them, right? Okay? Kind of looks like Will Smith and iRobot, right? Human-designed robots, here's another problem with them, though. No matter how good they get and how amazing they look, they cannot generate or procreate more robots. You leave 2 robots in a room, put on some light jazz, maybe a candle, come back 6 months, whatever. There's no third robot that's come from that, okay? Even this guy, okay, had to be designed, had to be manufactured, had to be programmed. Some of you are going, what's that one on the right? Okay, you do know who that is, right? It's a Cyberdyne. I won't even get into that, okay, all right, so. But you know what? humans can procreate and have additional humans. Inside there's a complex reproductive system, pre-programmed information inside. Chromosomes, DNA coding, female and male is exactly how they come out. Microscopic sperm egg, this little tiny microscopic sperm egg comes together, and here I am. Here you are. Within 6 days of conception, the cells know which cells are for the baby and which cells are for the placenta. Millions of chemical compounds go through the placenta. It even secretes a hormone to stop the woman from menstruating so that she won't abort. The baby will now actually, grow inside the womb. 3 weeks in, there's skin, skeleton, spine, and neurological components. 5 weeks, there's a heartbeat. 6 weeks, teeth, skull, muscles, eyes, ears, lungs. At 8 weeks, half-inch with a mouth, a jaw, 10 toes, and 10 fingers. At 12 weeks, 2 inches, full movement, organs, swallowing. I've seen, I love with grandkids, it's great. You get to see these new 3D ultrasounds. Like the ultrasounds of my kids in 1984, 1986, and stuff like that, it looked like a Rorschach, interpretation thing. I had no idea what I was even looking at. Today, now you look at them, you see the kid's face all crunched up in the womb and everything like that. See their eyelashes and everything like that. See their little thumb up by their mouth, sucking their thumb. See their little fingers and toes. At 40 weeks, all of a sudden at 40 weeks, a precision series of functions all start to motivate and move and push that new person out. Okay? And you get one of these. Starts with a microscopic that you can't even see, and 9 months later, your son is laying on the table, who's now 3 inches taller than me, and has 4 kids of his own. Think about that. All driven by what? Information. So we'll close with this. The skeptic then asks the question, okay, so do you think there's a God? And my response would always be when they say, is there any proof that God exists? I take them to the MacBook, the dandelion, the cell, and then ultimately the human. Because it is so beyond any kind of possibility coming from random. So the believer would reply with this, the MacBook and the robot. If I had a MacBook up here in front of you, anybody think that this, as you looked at it, it just happened out of nowhere? Doesn't it reflect design? I mean, the whole thing is completely reflecting and exhibiting a team. I looked up the information on the MacBook Air. The design team was 83 people to come to this final version. So the robot and the MacBook display what? Design and engineering. But the dandelion, the cell, and the human, no design. I'm not being funny right now. I'm telling you, this is the argument or the position you're going to come up against. Yes, the MacBook, the robot, the sound system in here, Ed's keyboard, all of those reflect what? Design. But when you say dandelion, cell, or human, they're going to say what? No design. Totally random, just happened over time. And you say to yourself, how could you say that? How could you say there was no outside design or engineering going on? Look at the information that's going on inside. Remember, also, you can always say this too, there's no way to disprove that God exists. So when somebody pressures you with, I want you to prove that God exists. You can go to the MacBook, the dandelion, the cell, and the human and talk those through. But you can also say, what's your proof that God doesn't exist? Interesting. All of these have 2 dimensions. One is the hardware. All of you right now have hardware. Some of yours is a little softer than it needs to be, but you do have hardware, okay? So this is my hardware right here, okay? The frame, all those complex systems I told you about, the structural components. But we also have software, the metaphysical, instructional programming components of how we move and how we function and how we speak. There must be an outside source of the information. So that's my strongest message for this opening night on worldview. If there are two worldviews out there, one is a naturalistic worldview that everything came about by accident over time, and the other is a biblical Christian worldview. There has to be some basis where you bring somebody to say, how do you explain the outside information? How do you explain the final format and function? So we'll close with this. Anybody do a little statistics tonight before you go home? Okay, you can watch this later. You'll fall right to sleep. I guarantee, okay. Assume a systematic mechanism starts with one component part, then randomly develops and mutates without any intentional design into two component parts. And it must continue that, integrate and function into three components and so on. If you continued random iterations to some final fully functional form, a systematic mechanism that had just 200 parts. Everybody with me? So the one morphs over time, becomes two, the two become three, the three become four, and they all have to do what? Work with each other, and you just take that out till it has 200. By the way, the 200 isn't even close to how many are going on in the dandelion. It's not even close to how many are going on in the MacBook or in the cell, and certainly not even close to what's going on in the human. But let's just give them 200. It would require 200 successful mutations. And by the way, science states in all the biology textbooks, mutations rarely ever occur, and beneficial successful mutations are even more rare. Most mutations are what? They end up in death or some kind of destruction of some kind. Number two, assume an equal chance that at each step there's a 50% chance for a good mutation and a 50% chance for a bad mutation, okay, at each step. That probability would be 0.5 chance for a good one to the 200th power. You remember the numbers we did earlier? Okay. 0.5 to the 200 is 6.23 times 10 to the negative 61st power, which means it's a 1 with 60 zeros behind it. You have a 1 in that number chance of getting 200 successful mutations over time. How old is the universe? 10 to the 17th seconds. This is 60 zeros at the end of it. You see where we're going with this? There's not even enough time to have this work. Let me show you the math. Humans have arguably 23 separate systems, each with 200 components or more. So now you got to compound that what? Times 23. To arrive at one final version where everything is fully integrated and functioning is 1.6 with 60 zeros behind it. And then what do you do with that number? You raise it to the 23rd power. Do you have any idea what that math is like? A number with 60 zeros, and then in the exponent, put 23 and multiply it times itself 23 times. Do you have any idea how big that would get? The probability of complex final functional forms. So I'll give you this last little example. Let's grant them that there are 13.8 billion years in the universe. That's 10 to the 17th seconds. Okay, everybody good with where we're going? Okay? Some of you are still going, you lost me back with the cranium and I was tapping my head. I don't even remember why I was doing that. Okay. The Earth, the entire surface of the Earth is 10 to the 14th square feet. That's including the oceans and everything like that, okay? So 10 to the 14th square feet is our surface of our Earth. Let's assume each square foot has 1 billion mutating organisms going on in that square foot, okay? Can you picture that? Here's a square foot on the Earth. There's 10 to the 14th square feet on the planet. Each one has 1 billion mutating organisms going on in there. And they're mutating every half a second. That's 20 every 100 seconds, or 200 every 100 seconds. If they're successful, they continue, and if they don't mutate properly, you have to start again. 10 to the 17th seconds divided by every 100 seconds means you would get 10 to the 15 different trials by each system over the course of 13.8 billion years. Okay? That's how many trials would go on over the course of the planet. To get to those 200 mutations, you'd have to have 10 to the 14th area times 10 to the 9th billion systems times 10 to the 15th trials, which would be 10 to the 38th power total attempts. What's our magic number of it can't ever happen? 10 to the 50th, right? It was what Borel said, Emile Borel. 10 to the 17th, we're already looking at that and just saying, this is 10 to the 38th. And this is to do what? This is to get one functioning form with 200 components. The probability of not being successful is 1 chance in 60 zeros. Okay? 1 with 60 zeros following it. So if you took this 10 to the 60th and divided it by the 10 to the 38th, you'd basically get 10 to the 22nd probability that one of those attempts would be successful. Just one attempt in 13.8 billion years. The probability is technically less than 1, here's a number for you, billion trillions. It's less than 1 billion trillions. So here's your takeaways for tonight, night number 1. Now, based on tonight, how I wrap this last slide up, we'll find out whether or not we have everybody back on Monday night for session 2, or whether there's like 2 of you who come back on Monday night. And some of you are saying, Dave, there's like a 10 to the 17th chance that I'll be there on Monday night, okay? Here's your takeaways for tonight. There is no logical, rational person would ever assume that a fully functioning MacBook just randomly, accidentally happened. I'm going to go on the record with that. This thing is an amazing, I can watch movies on this, do spreadsheets. I've written books on this thing. I've graded papers. I mean, you think of all you can do on this thing, and you say to yourself, well, no one would ever say this thing just came out of nowhere. Okay? Why then would you then presume that the intricate nanotechnology systems going on inside the dandelion also just randomly, accidentally happened? We actually showed they're actually slightly more complex than what's going on in the MacBook. And we spray them with Roundup. Some of you are going, oh, poor little weed. Number 3, why then presume the detailed nanotechnology process flow within a cell accidentally happened? Why would you assume that? It's more complex than the MacBook or the robot. And here's the catch, the last one, right? You remember MC, right? So MacBook, the dandelion, MDCH, the cell, and number 4, the H, the human. Why would you ever presume the overwhelming complexity of 23 interdependent systems all hanging on the same calcium frame, wrapped in 22 square feet of aging fabric on the outside? Why would you assume that the complexity of all those working together within a human just randomly, accidentally happened over time? And I hope I've shown you that there's not even enough time. Here's the first, there's 2 problems, and this will segue us into next week. Number 1, probability. The numbers do not work. There is not enough time. There's not enough. In fact, it was 3.4 billion years back when I was in 7th grade, in the early 70s. And it's progressed now to 13.8 billion because you keep needing more time. And number 2, no one has any explanation for the outside information. When you ask them, where did the information come from? Don't know. It randomly occurred. The programming for that, what did we say the MacBook had? 55 million lines of code, 436,000 miles, 18 times around the planet? Random. Here's some readings. These are at my website. You can, if you're up for some, these are some of my favorite readings. I brought one of them with me tonight. Dr. A.E. Wilder Smith's book, published by The Word for Today, Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, back in 1987. The Scientific Alternative to Neo-Darwinian Evolutionary Theory. And the whole key in here is in this one quote from Dr. Wilder Smith. Only information theory can explain the genesis of self-replicating information storage and retrieval systems in biology. Only information theory can explain the genesis of self-replicating information storage and retrieval systems in biology. Darwin thought the natural random phenomenon, sifted and filtered by natural selection over time, could turn up in biology. But we know today that Darwin did not, and indeed could not have known, namely that the biology's very heart depended upon information storage and retrieval systems, which cannot conceivably in any way arise in a random force of natural law. And that's where I am coming from in my worldview. I haven't gone to the Bible for my worldview. We're going to get to the Bible down the line. Is the Bible reliable? Doesn't it have errors? All that. We'll cover that as an apologetic topic. But right out of the gate, when I think about my worldview, I've either got to have a worldview that all of this came out of nothing. There's no purpose, no intent, just random over billions of years, or there's an outside party who did it all. And here's some great readings for you. You can go to my website, newtonfio.com, and you can see some of these sources and so forth. And for next week, Monday, June 12th, we're not on Wednesday nights, we're going to be Monday nights, going for the rest of the summer. That's our usual Monday night, figure it out. But we're going to next week open up the first part of two parts on questions of origins in our universe and life, and just life in general. So, let's stand and we'll have a closing word of prayer. Father in heaven, I thank you for this time to get a little sample of how to address the skeptic. Father, we want to be well-versed believers. Lord, we want to have really good material, rational, logical thought. Lord, I pray that we would recognize that the evidence for your creation, even as Romans chapter 1 says, it's all around us as we look at the creation. It's testifying of who you are. So, Lord, I pray that we would be diligent, be good stewards of your word, but also be good students, Lord, to understand that the other side who is asking the questions oftentimes doesn't have any information that they understand. They're just quoting things that are kind of the party lines. So I pray, Lord, that we'd be thoughtful, we'd be kind. I know that Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, it says, always being ready to give an apologia for the hope that is in you, comma, but with gentleness and reverence. And Lord, that's the way we want to be. We want to be thoughtful, we want to be articulate, we want to be kind and loving, but we also want to stand firm on the logic as we defend the faith. And so at this very core level, what is your worldview? Lord, I pray that we would ask ourselves, am I coming at the world through a biblical Christian worldview, or am I coming at it through a naturalistic, humanistic worldview? And Lord, that then becomes the segue into all the additional comments and questions we're going to look at. So thank you for this time. Thank you for your word. Lord, thank you for this church body. I pray, Lord, that we would be believers who truly are well-equipped, and that we could represent you well when those who would ask about what's the hope going on inside you, we would have a strong basis upon which we stand. So we give it all to you, and we thank you for the weeks coming up where we can get into so many other additional questions, Lord. We pray this in your name. Amen.